topics and opinions expressed in the following show are solely those of the host and their guests and not those of W4CY Radio, its employees, or affiliates. We make no recommendations or endorsements for radio show programs, services, or products mentioned on air or on our web. No liability, explicit or implied, shall be extended to W4CY Radio or its employees or affiliates. Any questions or comments should be directed to those show hosts. Thank you for choosing W4CY Radio.
Inarticulate speech, inarticulate speech of the heart. Inarticulate speech, inarticulate speech of the heart. Inarticulate speech, inarticulate speech of the heart.
Hello and welcome to It's Your Voice, the show that hosts enriching conversations in diversity. My name is Bahia Yaksain. I'm a core alignment coach, which means I help people pull out and get clear about what really matters to them, what their values are, and how to align our actions with our values so we're living better lives. And that benefits everyone. I'm also an emotional wisdom training specialist, which means to help us remember to use our emotions wisely and not be run by them, but think them as like signals and indicators of what we need to pay attention to. And then again, develop, cognitive, intelligent behavior that serves us and others better. And I've been a diversity educator for many, many years. I'm really honored to be able to have a platform weekly to have conversations on all kinds of topics. And before I mention what we're doing tonight, I just want to remind any listeners or viewers, if you're interested in seeing my training offers or classes, and which I can tailor for various groups and organizations. I also coach individuals. You can find that information on my website, which is called knowwhatyouvantcoaching.wordpress.com. There, you can also contact me on the contact page and let me know if you're interested in training or have show suggestions. I'd be happy to hear from you. Tonight, we are talking about voting, and I titled this episode, Who Cares About Democracy Anyway? Because this is such an intense midterm election this year. If you're paying attention, even if you're not paying attention, if you live in this country, you're very likely to feel the tension, if not hear about the tension of so many hotly contested seats in our country. And I invited 4 panelists today to talk about what voting means to them and what is that phrase. I mean, I had to think about it a lot. It's been a few months now of like, okay, what does that mean? What? Our democracy is at stake? What the heck does that mean? How is it at stake? And I had to make a conscious effort to take that thought seriously. And I wanted to hear from other people, their thoughts. There's so many things we could discuss, but I want to turn it over to the panel and let them share some of their views and about voting, what democracy means to them, what is at stake now for this election. And I know a lot of people are dead set. Apparently 21 million or more people have already voted, which is great. But there are a lot of people who haven't voted yet. And I know there's some people who are feeling disillusioned and not wanting to vote or still not sure how to vote. So my hope is that this conversation will benefit many people. So I have 4 people tonight and I'm so excited. I'm going to introduce first the one I have known the longest, Whitney Finstrom. He and I met, I hate to say, it's been decades, many decades ago. We both served in the U.S. Peace Corps in Nepal. And Whitney is someone who really cares about community and people. In fact, he's a community development worker. He studied affordable housing, studies all over the country, and just a great friend. And Whitney, thank you for being here from Pennsylvania.
Thanks, Pia. Great to be here. Great to see you.
Great to see you. We haven't talked for so long. This is not a scripted show. I don't know what's coming out of people's mouths, but I'm just delighted because you're so community oriented. I'm so happy you're here.
Yeah.
And next, I want to introduce Caitlin Griggs, who is a social studies teacher She recently achieved her master's degree in education from the School of Education at UC Davis. She loves teaching at her junior high and teaching the love of learning to young adults. Caitlin, thank you so much. I know you're also an artist. She's also an amazing artist.
Oh, thank you so much. I was going to have my camera oriented toward my art, but it's not about that, even though it's like fun to have that in the background. So nice to see you again.
You're welcome. And
now in the evening.
I want to mention, Caitlin and I are both in California, and we have two more guests, and I'm just really grateful and honored because a dear, dear, dear friend from college introduced them to me, and this is my first conversation with them. They both live in Georgia, which we know there's all kinds of election, what should I say, talk. So Sophie Mott, please join us. I'm so happy that you're here. And Sophie is a retired high school English teacher, currently owns something called We Shall Be Well. Want to hear about that? She became a U.S. citizen 8 years ago, although she mostly grew up in America, if I understand that correctly, and is a craniosacral therapist for cats and dogs. It's awesome. They need therapy too. And fourthly, again, thanks to my dear college friend, is Andrea. I'm not sure how to pronounce her name. Is it Timpone?
It is. Yes.
Okay. Thank you also for being, and Andrea is the retired president and CEO of a nonprofit nature center in Land Preserve, and enjoys outdoor activities, travel in beautiful places, and sharing natural history with children and adults. And you're currently working as a poll worker for early voting in your community. I really want to hear about that. But let's start with the basics. And I think I'll just go in the order in which I introduce people for simplicity's sake. Usually reverse orders from that are typical patterns in our society. I usually start with the women. But Whitney, you've known me the longest. So would you mind telling us like what voting means to you and how you're feeling? And I know a lot of people have like passion and feelings, and
sure. Thanks, Pia. Can you hear me okay?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, great. Yeah, it feels, I'm sure everyone feels like this too, like in Georgia, of course, and Arizona, Nevada. Anyway, it feels like ground central, ground zero.
Okay.
I'm in Western Pennsylvania, right? So I'm in Pittsburgh, and we have Obama coming this Saturday, and we have lots of people coming through because it is a really critical voting area. And like a lot of areas around the country, you get sort of Democratic core, right? So Philadelphia in the east and then Pittsburgh in the west, those tend to vote heavily Democratic. And then you have what James Carville called Alabama in the middle, not to blast Alabama, but the T. So it's very conservative outside and more Democratic inside in the cities. So just this past weekend, I was outside of the city, like up and down our street, frankly, a lot of Fetterman signs. John Fetterman is running against Dr. Oz for Senate, and Shapiro is running for governor as a Democrat against Mastriano, the Republican. So what always gets me is just the extreme contrast, So in the city, mostly I haven't seen any Oz signs, or I think one Mastriano sign. If you go just a little bit outside, it's all Oz and Mastriano. And there's that constant contrast. And if you go to other parts of the country too, I'm sure you'll see the same thing. But anyway, that's just something that's really struck me recently. But the other point I wanted to make was that, unfortunately, I didn't get a chance to become a poll worker this year. Different things happening, but in 2020, I was a poll worker. I'd always wanted to do it, and I said, "Send me anywhere. I don't care in the city." It's so I did it. It was a great experience, and very interesting because even then, it was a little quieter. But I mean, we had some situations where people try to force their way into the voting area, and they weren't, officially people to watch the polls and that kind of stuff. So that happened even then. But interestingly enough, too, even though Biden won carried Pennsylvania, right, and Pittsburgh, the precinct where I was actually went for Trump. And I wasn't too surprised because there were a lot of people who in the area where I work is fairly conservative, and I could tell by people's hats and scarves, right? That it was going to be different, at least for me. And so I had to hang up the little strip, looks like a shopping strip, up on in Pennsylvania, you tape it up on the door at the end of the election, glass door, and it's all the voting. It's a summary. And Trump had just barely won that precinct. Again, not so surprising given what I saw. Anyway, my point is that democracy is an engagement. You have to be heavily engaged. You cannot sit back. You can't just hope somebody else takes care of it, because there are so many critical issues at hand. I mean, all you have to do is look around and listen, and it does feel very personal this year. There's a lot of hype here, as probably everywhere, tons of commercials, all negative. It's hard not to feel kind of down on the process and democracy, to be honest. And sometimes I worry that that's kind of the intent of some of it, because it feels sort of suppressed, And I see this stuff going on, not to knock Arizona, but, with the folks outside of those drop-off boxes with fully armed. I mean, that's voter suppression. I don't know. That's what I call it. Anyway, those are just wide range of thoughts.
Okay. Well, thank you. And I appreciate you bringing up the voter suppression, because certainly there are more barriers for some people and lots of intimidation more this year. Which is incredibly discouraging. And so many people are frightened, having tons of anxiety, depressed. It's a scary time. So I appreciate you mentioning those things. Sure. And I want to actually drop down in my view. I say down because Sophie's picture is lower than mine. To just go to Sophie to just give us a. I'm just going to ask the same broad question I asked Whitney. Like, what does voting mean to you right now?
Well, I actually had to work hard to vote, meaning, though you can't tell by my accent, I've lived in the States well over 4 decades. I'm originally a citizen of Great Britain. And for many years, I simply chose not to become a citizen. In honesty, some of it was laziness. I didn't want to take the test. I didn't want to have to study for it. And I also didn't feel that my vote was that important. Although I had done some volunteering and things for different political campaigns. But then in 2013, during the time that Obama was president, I started hearing some things along the immigration line, that things were going to become tougher if you weren't a citizen. Even though I was a resident alien with a quote-unquote green card, that my life may change because of my status. And so that was really the impetus. I'd like to say that I was fervently behind democracy and I wanted to get out and vote. But in all honesty, that wasn't the case. It was more fear on my part of not being a citizen. And would I be welcome in whatever happens in the future? And I realized it was important. It was important for me, if I was going to volunteer, if I was going to say something or have an opinion, that I better back that up with a vote. And so I studied a lot. I really honestly don't know how people who are not native English speakers pass the oral test, not a written test. It's very difficult. In fact, one of my questions, which I found quite ironic, was for me to define what the definition of rule of law was. And that's not a yes or no number answer, nothing simple. You had to be able to say that no one is above the law, including, the mailman or mail person, or all the way up to the presidency. Um, and so I became a citizen in 2014. And it was surprising to me, a really, really wonderful feeling to not only become a citizen, but the most important thing that I discovered was voting.
Okay.
It was incredible. Yeah.
I'm just going to reiterate that the most important thing you discovered was voting. I also want to say, I don't know if you have a mic plugged in because there's a little static when you talk.
Oh. Okay.
I just want to mention that, but I did hear all of your words and really value them. And my father was also an immigrant and went through the whole process of becoming a citizen in his 20s or 30s. And he really pounded into us, me and my siblings, how powerful it was to be a U.S. citizen. Like he just could never, in a positive way, get over how much freedom and to have the rights and the freedom. He was just blown away and never, ever, ever took it for granted. And I see that so many times we can take things for granted when we have the freedoms we've become accustomed to, and especially if we're not aware that we could lose them.
Right.
But let me turn to Andrea now. Thank you so much, Sophie.
Sure.
And what's on your mind, Andrea, as I ask, what does voting mean to you right now? What does it mean to you to be able to vote?
To able to vote. In retrospect, I think, or I know that I probably have voted in every presidential election since I could vote. But up until recently, I probably didn't vote in some of the other elections, admittedly, until, probably 10 years ago, because I didn't think they made that much difference. But I have learned since then how much difference, what difference those local decisions and those local elections mean, and that they're every bit as important as voting in the presidential election. So I haven't missed any in years and years, and don't intend to till I have to. I have enjoyed. This has been my first experience as a poll worker. I retired last year, so first opportunity to do it. And we have 3 weeks of early voting in Georgia this year, and it's been a real learning experience. And, I will say that I don't see how there would be any way to fudge the election results given all the security measures that are in place here. I can't attest to the fact whether they were there before or not. I don't know, but I mean, things are not just double, triple checked. I think they're checked 12 times and they're controlled in so many ways. We are, Sophie and I live in different parts of the state. Sophie's more city oriented. And so my experience is living in a very conservative area. And in fact, at one point, our district was considered the most conservative district in the country. I don't know if that still stands. It may very well stand. There are a lot of strong feelings. There's certainly, if you watch any of the news channels, you see a tremendous, they even sneak into my Facebook feed now, and even into some silly games I play on the phone. I'm beginning to see political advertisements, which just blows me away that they're finding me there too. So not to speak of all the asks for money, but and driving, we just drove across the state. It's very different from Atlanta inside, as you can imagine, and around the perimeter to the rural areas. And I was just recently, and it's become so, I think people are so used to thinking in their own way of thinking that we can't even begin to see the other side. There was one of our rural newspapers that published an article about a candidate's visit, and it was written in such a way that it sounded like a political advertisement. And I commented on their Facebook page that, it just seemed like a political advertisement. And lo and behold, I got kicked off their Facebook page for making that comment. So it's, to some people, they they're just so used to thinking and seeing and being around other people that think the same way they do. They don't realize how much they think alike. And and I'm not saying I'm the best at it, although I try to be. I actually watch some pretty diverse news programs that we don't need to go into here, but just so I can kind of hear what the other folks that don't think like me are thinking and saying. And it's a great way to raise your blood pressure.
It's a really good idea.
But we, everybody should be doing that, because once in a while you'll see something or hear something and you think, well, now I understand why they're saying that or thinking that. So we just try to avoid talking politics in groups around where I live. So voting is important to me. I've loved being a poll worker. I can't wait to work on Tuesday for the big vote. Georgia tonight on the news says we have had 1.6 million early voters already. So it'll be interesting to see whether it's more conservative or more liberal when push comes to shove. I just can't even predict what it might be. We'll see.
Yeah, adds to the interestingness of these times. And you got major gubernatorial race and senatorial race and wow. Okay.
Lots of mudslinging going on.
Yeah, I do want to come back around to hear more about your experiences as you're sitting at the polls. But let's check in with Caitlin first. Thank you so much, Andrea. So, Caitlin, what is on your mind related to voting and what it means to you?
To me, as a middle school teacher, it's funny because you would think, like, I don't know, they're pretty far from being able to vote, but it's often on the minds of the students as well, and they're always asking about politics and things. And I don't like to say very specifically, this is what I'm going to vote for, or this or that, but I never say anything like, oh, that doesn't matter, or oh, you don't need to worry about that, you're too young, or anything like that. Because for me, it's important to essentially commit yourself to being an engaged citizen. And I want to be able to be a model for my students, because I remember having teachers growing up who were apathetic about the system. And even when I was in high school, I remember one of my teachers said, oh, I never vote. And I didn't really understand like what that meant. And I remember hearing like some other students like being like, yeah, my parents say it's not worth it, and things like that, like, oh, it doesn't even matter here in California or anything like that. And I remember coming to my parents with that, because I have a really wonderful relationship with my parents. My father has always really engaged with me, this great sense of like what it would be like to be a US citizen, a lot like you were saying, Bahia, about your father. And when I told him that one of my teachers said, oh, it doesn't matter, like voting doesn't matter, I never do it anyway, he was like, I mean, he was almost like upset and disgusted that somebody who works in education would like say something like that to future citizens. And so, especially as a history teacher and as someone who works with kids, I just think it's really good to be a model and showcase that voting is a way that you can have a voice, right? That it is a way that you are able to engage with your local politics too, because a lot of times they just are interested in like the major elections. But I mean, I'm just staring at my like Sacramento County measures and stuff like that. And I remember one of the first times I actually voted in local elections, because I didn't quite understand it yet when I first started voting. I love the rebuttals that there are between the two different sides. Like you can hear about, for each measure, why is it that we should spend our money in this way or that way? And it reminds me of that great energy that I have with my students when they're going to debate about something and they bring up their issues back and forth. And it's just a way to feel energized and a part of the system that we have in our country, so that we can actually be a part of it. And so that's what matters to me. If I'm going to wear my I voted sticker so that they can see it, and I don't have to say anything about what I voted for, but it's just It's important to me.
Mm. Thanks. I appreciate you sharing what your father thought too. And I mean, really, honestly, I grew up mostly in this country, not entirely in this country, but with the privilege, like with the idea of you have the right to vote, and without the barriers imposed on me that are imposed on other Americans, and in some areas with especially with redistricting and stuff. But I can't imagine not having that right. You know, I think about what's going on in Iran and you name it, Lebanon, Ukraine, and in places where, as I said before, people are just like would do anything for this kind of privilege. Would be a shame to lose democracy. And I appreciate both you, Whitney, use the word engagement. I always think about that democracy does require participation. And I think I want to kind of ask another round of questions about, and also before I do, Andrea, I really appreciated how you talked about how secure as a poll worker, how secure elections are. And I feel that we've had so many reassurances of the accuracy of the last presidential election results from so many different reliable sources that I don't doubt that we have a very secure system. And it's just sad that so many people have been sort of taught to doubt it. And I feel that's, to me, one of the greatest dangers that could lead to losing the democracy is people no longer trusting it, no longer participating in it, seeding doubt. So I wanted to ask this time kind of a go around of like, Whitney, what do you do to feel like you are? I mean, we're all busy. We work hard. Some people have to work even more hours than I do and are raising small kids. My kids are now young adults. And I think it's very hard to find the time. I mean, finding the time to vote is a big deal, but then finding the time to educate ourselves with information that we do believe and we feel secure and confident about, like knowing who we're going to vote for or what we're going to vote for. Whitney, can you share like how you find your, I'd like to hear from each one of you. And again, I mean, not necessarily, I know every state probably has, websites, but I'm just saying, like, what do you do to feel like you know what you're doing as a voter?
Yeah. Oh boy, that's a good question. Well, I mean, I lean on a couple different sources. I mean, one is the League of Women Voters. They put out a guide, so I'll check that. And maybe it's incorrect, but I feel like I'm pretty familiar this year with all the candidates and issues. How it is. Some years it's like, okay, I don't know about that judge, I don't know that person and whatnot, but I feel pretty certain I know exactly how I'm going to vote. To be honest, I mean, so there's not a lot. I mean, there's very little that would change my opinion, to be honest. It's not, I think I have a flexible mind, but things are so clear cut to me anyway. I'm just trying to survive the negative crush going on right now, to
way to
just
put it.
plow through. Yeah, but I mean, the way I then contribute to it, I haven't, unfortunately, like I've done phone banks in the past. I've done lots of canvassing and that kind of stuff, door to door. I haven't this year, but I've done some donations and and that kind of thing, and talked to friends and different people. But so one thought I had, if I don't mind if I could say briefly, that's a little disheartening about what's going on. I think in Pennsylvania, but I think it's going before the Supreme Court, is a case where one candidate in Pennsylvania, let's just say, wants to have the power to actually override the popular vote and go right to the state house and let the state house determine the election. And that is, to me, anti-democratic, if I should say, because it's,
Mhm.
it's basically negates my vote, right, or anybody else's vote, and just goes right to, and the reason for that is because of the crack and pack, right? It's the process of, trying to realign the voting the districts, right, congressional districts, and so on, reapportionment, and so what ends up happening in a lot of states, I thought about this and I listened to an interesting program about it. That's why in a lot of states anymore, such as Pennsylvania and others, you tend to have a Democrat who's governor and a Republican state house. Because usually statewide, it's popular vote, right? If for other races, it's dependent on how those districts are set up, and those are by people, And so, at least in Pennsylvania, we have a Republican state house, and the governor's a Democrat, and that's just the pattern. And the pattern seems to be repeating itself over and over in other states too. Anyway, just want to throw that out there.
No, I appreciate
On my
that.
mind.
Yeah, it's a really good example of a potential threat to democracy.
Right.
And I'm glad you're paying attention and reminding the rest of us to think of things like that. How about you, Sophie? What would you like to add to what helps you feel secure and informed about how your vote's going to impact the continuation of democracy, for instance?
Right. I think there's a lot of there are a lot of people who are disheartened with the election process, and so I think out of that, some people choose not to vote, and that is troublesome, because if that then becomes the case, then the people, the democratic process isn't working how it should. I actually did a little research just looking at some statistics. You know how people always say, well, it's just my vote. One vote doesn't count. And I looked back, and in the initial running of the president, Andrew Jackson won by popular vote. But when it came down to the electoral college, it was tied. So that one vote for the electoral college went to John Quincy Adams. So does your vote count? Absolutely. I think it's crucial that, I listen to and watch the debates. I look at lots of different news sources. I think Andrew was talking about, trying to hear what your beliefs are and the opposite view may be, to really take a look and see, so that I want to feel like I really know what I'm voting for, who I'm voting for, and what that person will do. And so we have early elections. I'm happy to be part of the 1 million plus people in the state of Georgia who's already early voted. I think judging by what happened in the election through the state of Georgia has really proven numerous times that it works, that it's valid, and that your voice, your vote counts.
Thank you so much. And yeah, both of you mentioned, you and Andrew both mentioned looking at the opposite view, and it doesn't kill us to listen to other points of view and challenge ourselves to say, and possibly learn something,
Right.
and possibly get to understand.
Right. There's such a divide right now that somehow with democracy, if we become so schismed that there is just that vote or this vote, and people aren't included, we're going to the country will lose its way.
Yeah, I honestly believe that. Agree with that. Thank you, Sophie. Andrea, what would you like to add to that?
In this conversation, it's dawned on me, and Caitlin, I'm so glad you're pushing your students to be engaged and think ahead, and because I know a fair number of 20 and young 30-year-olds I've talked to that aren't going to vote, have never voted, and just aren't plugged in. And I guess you'd have to say they just don't care. Even though they feel strongly maybe about an issue or two, they're just not going to be there. That concerns me
Yeah.
a whole lot, because
Mhm.
these are the people actually that some of the decisions we're making now and in this election are going to have a tremendous impact on their lives,
Mhm.
needless to say.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So I find it befuddling. I don't understand that, and I'm not sure how we can engage them further, and you know, short of making it a requirement to vote in this country. You know, I don't know. Caitlin, maybe you have some perspective on that. Maybe your students are more engaged than the 20 and 30 somethings.
Thank you. Yes,
Uh,
sir.
Would you want me to answer?
Yep.
Okay.
Please.
I would say I'm not sure if the 12-year-olds are necessarily more engaged politically, as in if they could, that they would rush to the office. But what I would say is that I do definitely see that apathy in people that are in my age demographic. I'm like slowly not going to be in that demographic anymore. But from what I see from a lot of the people I talk to, engaging with people online and other things, there's just this constant kind of, I don't know, this disbelief in the system. And that's, I think, definitely what both sides, either extremist right wing or even all the way like very far progressive, might like really lead into that idea that like them having this apathy and hatred towards how things are, that either it's tear it all down or it's you're right and it is insecure, and the the box, like you're saying about voting places being intimidated with gunmen in Arizona, things like that. Like it makes a lot of sense about how there's this development in people my age who have maybe had teachers or people in their lives who tell them that their vote doesn't matter, and then that can be twisted to be even more poisonous. But yeah, I wanted to answer the other question about how to educate ourselves too.
Please. Please.
Yeah, it's my turn for that?
Yes.
Should I raise my hand? I'm just kidding. So for me, I think it's been very interesting. I think it was Whitney and Andrea who were talking about the bubbles that really emerge that you see like just locally in person. And I think that I'm sure you experience it as well, because you are all highly connected individuals, especially for people in my generation, since they're so online. They get most of their information fed to them, right, through algorithms, either in social media. I notice what my Google News likes to throw at me and things like that. And of course, I've subscribed to the own news sources that I want to. And sometimes my blood pressure gets heightened, just like Andrea, by taking in some sources that maybe I don't agree with.
Mm-hmm.
But I've found that one way that I try to educate myself a little bit more in a way that's balanced to try and get to like, well, what's the core message behind this thing, or what is the core thing that I can understand about this news, is I like to look at multiple different news sources and see maybe how those titles or information has been skewed depending on what the leaning is on the site. And one of the very, very best sources I found for that is a website called All Sides. And All Sides, it takes a bunch of different headlines from different sources, and it will tell you, okay, is it from this place, which is more right-wing leaning? This one's more left. And here's one that's maybe a little more central. And you can see how the wording might be changed just in the title for how, depending on what bubble someone's in, how they might be fed the information regarding that. And so that's why I said this earlier, like I really enjoy seeing the rebuttals, the arguments, and all these different perspectives on, especially in California, our props that we have that we're going to be voting on very soon. And then also to see, well, what's the origin of that person? What is their background and their affiliation? And these are the sort of things that I like to teach my students as well. not
Mhm.
necessarily like, oh, you could never trust this person because they're on the board of this or that, but well, what is that board's mission? What is it that they want to do for our country? What is their allegiance to you as a person and your own beliefs? And so it takes a long time, but I think if we're all curious and care about where we're going and we want to use our minds, then that's what I like to do.
Thank you. That's great. All Sides, and Whitney mentioned Women's League of Voters, two different sites that are historically trusted and reliable, really good researching information, the Women League of Voters in particular. I wanted to respond to, Andrea, your question about, let's just say the 20-year-olds.
Mhm.
And because of my children, I know some 20-year-olds, fortunately, love them, great human beings. And I see that, and I do, I think it's a luxury to, like, I don't assume everyone has the time to do this, and I prioritize it. But when I see an opportunity to talk to any one of them, I really do sit down and try to ask questions, like not lecture, but like,
What?
What do you mean? What do you mean you don't want to vote? Can you tell me what's behind that? And not argue, not debate, not brainwash, not say you've got to vote for this person, but just ask them open-ended questions and take them seriously as adults with really important opinions and values. And just having, I mean, that's one thing I think I can do is just converse and have conversations and not let opportunities pass if and when we're with people who are disillusioned about it. Because it can be like an epidemic, it could spread. So why not address it when and where we can? And I know that not everyone can do that. And we don't have to be history teachers to be able to do that, just caring people. And I wanted to just make a little bit of a comment myself about what influences who I vote for and how I vote. And then we'll just have one more brief go around because we have about 4 more minutes. But I wanted to say that what I find that I look for, not necessarily consciously, of course, I'm looking at the issues and what I see is lots of connections. Like, it's really hard to separate, like, say, I'll like the right to choose. Oh, thank you. 6 minutes left. To me, that is totally that's totally related to economics. Like, I don't like, well, it's either economics or this. Like, I look for the connections between what we call the major issues. And no one's perfect. There's always flaws with every single candidate. It's hard. I don't think I know anybody who's 100% happy who doesn't appear to be, like, let's say, drinking the Kool-Aid. There are some people who can do that. But I believe that's a small minority. And I believe that people who have been convinced that one person or this person or that person is, like, got everything right, I think someday there'll be some kind of awakening, and they might be really angry about what I consider misinformation that they've been given. I really do believe that there's going to be an awakening. But anyway, I don't mean that in a religious way. I just mean in a as we get more and more correct information by hopefully looking at other sources of information and listening, being willing to cultivate, being willing to listen to opposite points of view. But another thing that influences me is integrity. It's really hard for me to vote for someone who I feel like is totally either lying to me or denying what is actual factual. Like, there's actually, like, primary sources of someone saying something and then completely saying the opposite. And I do want to mention, like, and I have voted. We have Democrats in my family, we have Republicans in my family, and we have independent. I mean, we have lots and lots of arguments and debates. But I really, right now, really appreciate the modeling that Liz Cheney's doing. Longstanding Republican who has said, I don't think I've ever voted for a Democrat in my life, but this time I would, if it's voting for someone who is perpetuating lies and or encouraging violence like that. I just can't stand. Like I was telling Whitney, and I haven't talked for a long time, but when he said, yeah, sure, I'll be on the show, I said, sometimes I just feel like I just want to vote for the most nonviolent candidate, because the violence is increasing, the anti-Semitism, the, threat, the horrible stuff. I don't even need to go into specific ones, but the violence that's politically motivated is on the rise. So I definitely know not to vote for people who are promoting violence and who are profiting by voting violence for power, for money. Those are clearly people I don't want to vote for. and then of course I look for the candidates with the most, whose values seem to actually align best with what I want for my community and my country. So I talked more than I thought, but we just have if everybody takes just one sentence, let you have a closing thought. And I know that we need to wrap up, but Whitney, do you have a closing thought?
My closing thought is cut through the fog. That's my goal. Just
Thank you.
get clarity. Don't get muddled in the muck. I've got a friend who's helps me through that muck and gets just to clarity. So that's my message. Get to
Great.
clarity. Don't
Thank
get
you.
caught up in the fog.
Cut through the fog. Thank you so much, Whitney. And how about you, Sophie?
I think it's to please vote. That your vote matters. You matter. Your opinions matter. If you find somebody that matches that, please go out and vote. But also vote early. Then you don't run into problems at the polls. Hopefully.
Please vote. You matter. What you think matters. Vote early. Thank you so much. How about you, Andrea? What's your closing thought?
Hit the nail on the head, Bahia, when you said, and this is what I do, is look for somebody that speaks truth. And sometimes it's who speaks the most truth, because sometimes not everybody does anyway. So, but who is at least trying to be the most truthful. And they get my vote, no matter what side.
Thank you very much for sharing that. Look for someone who speaks truth, who speaks the most truth.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Caitlin, what's your closing thought?
To shift the statistics on young voters.
Yay. Shift the statistics on your young voters.
Hopefully, when Sophie's looking things up, there might be a little bit more about young people voting more. Yeah.
And I just want to throw out anybody who can help voters get to polls, because there's some people who physically cannot get to polls, and I used to do that in high school. I would, contact your local entities to see who needs rides to the polls if they can't vote. That's one way to really help people vote, and through conversations like this. And I am thankful and grateful to all of you. Thank you so much for sharing this time. And I want to thank our listeners and viewers. And I want to thank DJ, our engineer, and our producer, Dean Piper, and encourage everyone to tune in again next Wednesday at 8 p.m. Eastern on W4CY and Talk 4 TV to It's Your Voice. And may we all have enriching conversations in diversity this week.
Inarticulate